Hi, everyone. This week's guest is Lisa Falco. She works in what is known as the FemTech sector, which is the specialist interface between women's health and technology, and it focuses on how data can be used to better understand the female body. Lisa has a Master's of Science in Engineering Physics and a PhD, and she's the author of Go Figure, The Astonishing Science of the Female Body. She's also the former head of data science at Ava Women, the maker of the Ava bracelet, which is one of the multiple devices that I use and love to track my cycle. Lisa has spent her career developing algorithms to decipher the menstrual cycle and help women get pregnant faster, and this was inspired by her own devastating experience of miscarriage. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation about how technology is changing the landscape of women's health. Hi, Lisa. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Same here. I am very, very excited for this conversation with you. And I really wanted to get into the whole femtech side of things because I have used multiple devices for many years. My friends think I'm crazy because I literally use 5 at the moment, but it's because I really love collecting data. I'm sure you can relate.
Yep.
Yep. And I love to then share this data with my audience so that they can help themselves, empower themselves. And like I said, I'm just really looking forward to this conversation because I feel like you're the queen of femtech and data a little bit. So maybe we can get into that. What exactly is this niche of the technology sector for those who might not be familiar with what femtech is?
Well, it depends a little bit on the definition, actually. It's first and foremost technology that is developed for women and really try to cover women's needs. I think originally it was really based on health as well, but it can be interpreted in quite broad way. It can also be apps helping women that are suffering from domestic violence or just jobs that are really, the vast majority are women and help for them in their environment as well. So it can be interpreted like that, but the most classic interpretation is really focus on women's health and how to it's a lot about reproductional health, of course, the menstrual cycle, and different issues that are specific to women.
Yes, I mean, I'm completely blown away by how many emails I get on a monthly basis from new companies that are popping up that are doing all kinds of things I never even imagined. I often am saying, wow, I can't believe someone came up with that. And it's stuff that, like I said, I just can't believe that we have an app or a device for that now. And does it seem that way to you too, that there are so many new companies popping up that are, very innovative?
Yeah, it's a really exciting development, I think. And also, since there's not been so much funding, within the research, I have the impression that a lot of this research is actually happening in the companies, and the data that they managed to collect, they actually using for the good of women's health. So there's a lot of this research that is happening in that sector rather than in the academic sector. So that makes it very exciting. But you should, of course, also, I mean, there not everything is useful. I think you also need to be a little bit critical as a consumer to all the things that are coming out. So there are
Like,
both two sides of this.
oh, no doubt. I completely agree. Because some of the things I just keep thinking, okay, that is not something I'm going to use. And so I'm curious,
Yeah.
like what would be something that you don't think is necessarily useful?
Well, I tend to ignore those.
That's fine.
No, I'm thinking more that I see a lot on websites where I feel that there's information out there that is not necessarily correct.
Mm.
So I think it's quite important to be well informed about the basics so that you can judge for yourself what makes sense and what doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no, I agree with that fully. And it's interesting because there have definitely been moments where I keep thinking, or I'm thinking, we're taking this to a level that feels more complicated than it needs to be.
Mhm.
And I found that I continue to come back to charting with a basal thermometer and checking my cervical fluid. And now I see a lot of companies I say a lot, but it's, it feels like a lot, but I know it's not a lot. But more companies reaching out saying that they've found this device that you insert vaginally and it checks your cervical fluid and then tells you whether you're in your fertile window or not. And so I feel as though people are definitely being super innovative, but it also feels a little more complicated to me personally. What do you think of that? Is that something that you felt too?
I agree, and I think a lot of those technologies can be interesting because they will open your eyes for a moment, and really, make you think about a lot of things around your health, your menstrual cycle, and so on. But a lot of these things can also be covered with knowledge and listening to your body, and tracking your own signs and just feeling it. And I think it's important that the technology should be a support for the discovery of your own body, but I don't think it can do all that discovery for you. Might be different for some diagnostic tools, of course, but they are still to come, and they are a bit too new to talk about at the moment, I think.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that that's very true. When I think about, uh, just like Ava, for instance. So I know that you worked with Ava, I believe in the beginning stages of it. And for everyone who's listening, I was telling Lisa that I use like 5 different devices right now, and I love to use them to I can see what's going on with my body and talk about it with all of you. And Ava's one of them that I've used probably for 4 years now. It's been a while, 4 or 5 years. And there have been times where I took a break, like during the pandemic. I was like, can't deal with that. I can't deal with anything right now. But I've always come back to it. And I really love the data points that Ava provides, because you can clearly see changes in these in these parameters between the first half of your cycle and the second half of your cycle. What made you guys choose those ones?
They were based on research. So we went through the whole literature looking at, what kind of changes could you expect in your vitals in the first part of your menstrual cycle versus the second part. But to be honest, when we started, a lot of those parameters had never been tracked continuously over the cycle. Of course, temperature was a given one. I mean, the temperature method has been around for decades, so that's not revolutionary. But for instance, heart rates, we knew that we had seen data that said that heart rate really, it's lower in the mid follicular phase, and it's higher in the mid luteal phase. But no one had on a larger patient group actually, looked exactly how it would changes over the menstrual cycle. And we have similar indications with breathing rate, with heart rate variability. And we were curious. We didn't know so much about the sleep patterns, for instance, if that would change. There were a lot of theories. And so we basically decided that we should track all of them and see what turned out to be useful in the end. And I think we saw a lot of new things that no one had observed before, like heart rate actually goes up slightly before ovulation, that you also have these changes in breathing rate as well. So,
And
yeah.
What made you think about using it on the wrist? Oh, I'm gonna wait for the dog to stop barking. Sorry. What made you decide to use the wrist? Because I feel like the wrist temperature is quite different to basal temperature in your mouth or under your arm or something like that, or even vaginally. So what was the impetus for that?
Actually, we wanted something that was really convenient for women to use.
Yes.
That was, there are better places to measure temperature for sure, but you don't necessarily want to do it, right? So we wanted it to be comfortable. And also what we found out that we knew actually from chronobiology. So chronobiology is a study of how the body changes chronologically, for instance, over the day and night, this kind of rhythms. And of course, also the menstrual cycle is also a rhythm. But what happens during the night is that the temperature gets more evenly distributed over your extremities. So that's also one of the reasons why you should wear Ava in the night. and not during the day, because during the day you can't really measure temperature reliably on your wrist. But during the night, there are some effects. I don't know if it's melatonin or something else that distributes the temperature more evenly.
Oh,
In the
that's so
exert.
interesting. Okay, right. I
Yeah.
mean, that makes sense. It actually makes me think about what we were just talking about helpful devices versus maybe things that are overcomplicated things. And I feel as though we all come to this knowledge differently. And some people are not interested in taking their oral temperature every morning or, at specific times, or they can't because they work night shifts or they wake up at different times or they're postpartum and all of that. So I recognize that there's space for all different kinds of devices. And I could see how something might be amazing for one person, whereas the other, it's not so much. I imagine that was probably part of the research with Ava as well.
It was. I mean, I tested a lot of other methods personally, and it was a lot when I tested the others, I realized how good Ava was, because when you develop something, you only see the flaws, but then you
Right.
tried everything else and you realize that was maybe even worse. So, for instance, basal temperature, that didn't really work for me at the time, because my kids were a bit smaller. They were always sleeping in my bed and they were always waking me up. And you're supposed to take your basal temperature immediately when you wake up in the morning, and you're not supposed to like go to the bathroom before or so. But I had such a crazy rhythm. I never slept properly, so my basal temperature wasn't reliable either. It was jumping up and down, and I actually got a better measurement with Ava because it measured continuously over the whole night, and they would at least get some good measurement points that I could use. So it worked well for me.
Which makes so much sense. And I totally agree. When I'm talking to the breastfeeding moms or the moms with small babies, I'm just like, you've got to wear something because otherwise it just becomes too hard and it's just sort of an additional stressor. So, is that kind of how you came to all this work? Like, what made you get involved in the femtech realm to begin with?
Well, I started with Ava, so I was the first employee there, but the idea was actually, of course, from the founders to do this. And when they first told me about it, that they wanted to measure these parameters to see when women ovulated, when they told me this, I actually started laughing. I was like, that's not possible, forget it. So I have a long experience in developing algorithm and machine learning, and also with wearables. But I was a bit burned from wearables because they're quite sensitive, and I somehow I couldn't really believe you could have a reliable measurement. But I really liked, I mean, the founders of Ava are so lovely people. And I just felt I really want to work with these people. So I want this to work. So I went home after a meeting and I read everything I could. And then I was like, yeah, you know what? This could actually work. I mean, it's not so crazy as it sounds. And I was really looking at the science, and I was like, you know what? I really want to give this a shot. This is so interesting. And from a work point of view, scientific point of view, but also I also wanted to work with these people. For me, working with the right people is very important as well.
So I was kind of thinking as you were saying that they wanted to track ovulation and you laughed about it. And was that because uh, you weren't aware of all the research that exists to show that ovulation changes so many things, like we were just talking about breathing rate and heart rate and all of that? Is that what it was?
Yeah, that's what it was. It wasn't common knowledge. I don't know if it's common knowledge now either, but it was not something, I've been working in other areas of medicine and technology before, but this particular one, I didn't know that well. So I knew about the temperature method, but that was it.
Right. So that really brings me to the fact that women have been excluded from a lot of research in the past because of their quote unquote pesky hormones, like you said in your book. They were viewed as problematic for conducting research and then for research outcomes. So, what do you think has been the outcome of this bias? And have things, I mean, I feel like things have changed, but have they really changed significantly in the research arena?
I mean, it has changed significantly. And nowadays you're not allowed to exclude women from studies.
Right.
So it's a must. You won't get the grants if you have not included the women. And I think there might even be a positive bias at the moment, which is great, which is well needed, because we're decades behind and there's so much data missing. And you see it also when you know, when you read my book, always, like, I think on every page you'll find, yeah, but more research is needed. It's a conclusion of almost everything. But it is changing, and I'm very positive about the future.
Thank God.
And maybe, sorry.
That's so good to hear.
Yeah, I also maybe just add one more thing about this, that I think researchers are people too, right? They will research things that are important to them and that what they feel connected to. And a few decades ago, these were mainly men. And of course, they don't have the same relationship to these issues. And yes, women were maybe not taken so seriously because the people who actually had all those feeling or issues, they were not the people doing the research. They were not the doctors. And now in many countries, I don't know exactly what it's like in the US, but in Sweden, the majority of doctors are female. And also in the research field, you can really see it's exploding. So, and women come in, you know, they have the highest education, they are super smart, and they're super motivated to put their energy into this. So a lot of things are happening at the moment.
Are there a few examples of the shifts that are happening? Because that's so cool to hear. I actually am thinking, I don't even know what the percentages are in the US in terms of women and versus men in research and in science, or at least in medicine, but I'm pretty sure it's still male dominated, unfortunately. Sorry, guys, but yeah, I'm curious about that. I will look into that. But yeah, you have a few examples of what shifted or what you're seeing?
What do you mean exactly? What
Oh,
shifted?
like
Like why there are more women, or
no,
why?
like what has changed in the research at this point? Like what we're seeing that's being done differently now?
Well, it is this thing that you always take women in, but I also think you see much more research on endometriosis. I know when I researched my book, they were saying that it could take 9 years to get a proper diagnosis of endometriosis, but at least in Sweden, this is not the case anymore. It goes much faster. It's still not good enough, but it is improving a lot, and you see a lot of research in this area. So I'm pretty sure in 5 to 10 years, I mean, my dream scenario is that you can take samples of your menstrual blood and get diagnosis based on this with new technologies such as proteomics or other type of omics to get this information.
Okay, I feel like you guys are way ahead of us because in the US, I mean, the process of getting a diagnosis with endometriosis is still painfully slow. And we're now only finally this fall, I believe, based on a recent documentary on endometriosis that I saw, are re-getting new diagnosis codes or expanded diagnosis codes that for endometriosis that have not changed since the 70s, I believe. So getting there, but it's very slow here. So you guys sound like you're light years ahead of us.
Yeah, but maybe I'm also a bit too overly positive in the sense that on the research side, because I read the research and it always takes time until research really get translated and applied in the clinics. So, you know, that could take more time for sure, but it is improving. I also think that a lot of awareness is coming from women themselves, and they might be pushing a bit more. And I hope that this whole FemTech movement will empower women to take a little bit more control over, you know, their health, and dare to say that, you know, no, I'm not doing well. I need help. You need to help me figure out what's wrong with me.
Right.
And that they realize, I mean, one of the messages I really wanted to bring out with my book is that there's a biological reason why something is happening and why you are suffering from something. You can actually measure that if you dig deep enough. So it's a real thing, and you should take yourself seriously, and you should take your friend seriously that is suffering from menstrual pain or something, because it's a real thing. It's not a made up thing. And somehow I believe that by really explaining what lies underneath, it makes it more real and more that people feel that it's worth being taken more seriously.
Oh my goodness. Absolutely. I could not agree more. So what you just said to me was so profound, and I wholeheartedly agree with what you're talking about. I feel exactly the same way. It's the same thing that I've been preaching for as long as I can remember, that this knowledge is power, and it enables you to have these conversations with your doctor that you might not have had before, because you're kind of just showing up hoping that they have a solution for you because you have no idea what's going on. And I think that that is just an incredibly disempowered place to be in. And it does require some pretty strong advocacy of yourself, though. Wouldn't you agree?
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And that also makes medicine today very unjust. You don't receive the same treatment if you're highly educated, or if you're the opposite, you don't get the same treatment. And it's very unjust. I think I don't want to be political, but it's a bit different in different countries. So
Yeah.
so I would
You
say
can get
Sweden, for
political. It's all
instance.
good. Let's do
Yeah,
it.
in Sweden we are more equal, I would say,
Mm,
than many other, and than other countries.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, economically, you're talking about.
Economically, and also, the average level of education, I would say the spread is maybe a little bit less large,
Right. Yeah.
and that I think has a big impact how people have access to healthcare as well.
Right. And you also have a completely different healthcare system, at least
Mm-hmm.
to the US.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Which I imagine changes things significantly. By the way, from your book, I really loved that you talked about that we all start out as female. And I feel like that might not be a well-known fact to a lot of people.
It wasn't a well-known fact to me, but I just loved it, so I had to put it in.
Yes, you
Yeah.
definitely did. Can you expound on that a little bit?
No, it was interesting because apparently it's on the Y chromosome, which is a chromosome that makes you a man. Actually, that has kind of a master switch, and if you have this, it turns on, and it's an active deviation. So like the normal, when you, maybe this becomes too complicated, but when you normally develop from the fetus and you have no external intervention, you will turn into a woman. And only if you have this master switch on the Y chromosome, then you will actively deviate and become a man. So I just also thought it was really funny that this is a deviation from the norm and not the other way around, which we
Yes.
tend to see it. Yeah.
We definitely tend to see it as that. I know. I
Yeah.
love that it's a deviation from the norm as well. So, everyone who's listening, just remember that, because I mean, our whole world really has been designed around men. I remember reading a book. God, it's been so long, but that was the whole focus of the book: is how everything, like technology and the height of light switches, all kinds of random things in the world, have basically been designed for men and not for
Yeah.
women. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I guess part of that truth is probably the same as with research. It was also designed by men, and that way it's so important to have diversity and inclusivity in all professions, whether you design light switches or if you design
Smartphones. I mean,
health
the
as well.
width of a smartphone, apparently that was a big thing as well, too.
Yeah.
It's like it's designed to be held in one hand by a man versus in a woman. It's quite difficult to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know we got the short end of the stick, ladies, in many cases. So I also, I would love to talk a little bit more about the downsides of FemTech and just sort of like all this research that is happening now. Are there do you think there are any, I know there's a lot of conversation about data privacy right now, especially with this very sensitive data, particularly in the US, because we have some backwards laws here. Most recently, the overturning of the Roe v. Wade abortion case. So do you feel like there are any downsides, like anything that could be happening, or are there potentials?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess you're referring to that they're really worried about what's happening with these period tracking apps.
Yes, I mean,
And
there is a lot of worry around that for sure. Yes, and if you have thoughts on it, I would love to hear them, because I personally think that some of it might be a little overblown, but I also recognize that anything seems to be possible these days.
yeah, so it's a very big difference between the US and Europe to begin with, because we have very strict data protection laws. So it's basically not possible that your data would go anywhere outside of your control and be shared with any authorities, because then actually the companies would be breaking the law.
Right.
So if you would go for European period app, I would feel really safe. Then with the other, you know, if you would not have that, I still think that it's not really, it would never be a sufficient proof to use a period app to say that you are pregnant, because yes, you could miss your period and not fill in. But did you not forget to click on the button that said that you got your period, or are you pregnant? How are you supposed to even, how are you supposed to prove that?
Right.
That doesn't make any sense to hold this against you. Also, there can be so many other reasons why your period is late. And
yes.
So it feels like if you want to really use scientific rigor, you could not use it against a woman. But I I'm not yeah, this might sound a bit harsh, but I don't feel that those people that are attacking women on these grounds are very sensitive to scientific rigor, to be honest, because then they probably wouldn't have made these laws in the first place, because they are, yeah, they actually have some quite serious health consequences, yeah, for women. So that's, if you get a fair trial with someone who actually understands what is a proof and what is not a proof, I don't see how it can be used against you.
Right.
I think you should be more worried, tracking, your position on Google. Your smartphone is continuously tracking your position, and things like this might be more dangerous than the actual period apps.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I feel like the data points that our phones track now are rather terrifying. And I mean, we see these things all the time, right? Where you just talk about something and then suddenly you're seeing ads on Facebook and on Google and things like that for said thing that you were randomly talking about with a person on a Tuesday.
Yeah,
So it
exactly.
is quite shocking. And so coming back to the FemTech side of things and all of these new devices and whatnot, do you foresee anything else as being problematic outside of the privacy domain?
I would say as soon as it becomes a medical device, that is, if FDA has approved it to be a medical device, and when you move out of the health tracking space, so as a health, if you stay in health and wellness, you can basically bring anything to market. There you can find some amazing, great products, but you can find everything because there's no quality control. But if you use things that are approved by the FDA, they are considered being medical devices. That means that they have been tested and they have been proven to show benefit for you. And therefore, I wouldn't hesitate to use this kind of things. And yeah.
I think I'd love to talk a little bit about the menstrual cycle as a whole. And there's a lot of really interesting information in your book that really isn't found anywhere else. And it reminds me again a lot of Ava and other trackers that I use that compile all this really cool information to help you figure out where you are in your cycle and what's going on. But you talked about various changes across the menstrual cycle around things like our voice and our eyesight. And can you talk a little bit about those? Because I feel as though people might think that's very cool.
Yes, of course. No, but what you need to understand is that those two main hormones that are changing over a menstrual cycle, that's the estrogen and the progesterone, they have some quite specific effects on on everything in our body. And for instance, progesterone is relaxing, the smooth muscle, and we have smooth muscles everywhere. So the effects are not restricted to only to the uterus or the reproductive areas. That's where you get, the eye. So the eye is surrounded by a muscle, and when you have a lot of progesterone, this muscle becomes a bit how to say, as softer and not as active. So it can influence. You can have different eyesight in different parts of the menstrual cycle, and this is also why you shouldn't get new glasses, for instance, when you're pregnant, because then your progesterone levels are they're 100 times higher than during the menstrual cycle.
Right.
So there can change quite a lot. And this is also, it changes when you go into menopause as well, because then you don't have progesterone anymore. You also talked about voice. It does, a lot of changes in the voice. You actually have receptors, I think, also for estrogen. And it's not so difficult to imagine, actually. That when you come into puberty, you get a changed voice as well. And that is, of course, also triggered by the hormones that comes from your menstrual cycle, the estrogen, among other things. And again, going back to progesterone, some effects that I think are really interesting is your intestines, that they are also smooth muscle. And then when you are in your mid-luteal phase, you have a lot of progesterone, and this relaxes your intestines. So it's quite common to be constipated in the second part of the menstrual cycle, and it can all be explained by the same effect.
Yes. Oh my gosh, very relatable. And I feel like you talked about something else I thought was so cool. It was something about the uterine lining and why we get rid of it on a monthly basis, and that it saves energy, evolutionarily speaking, before we had the abundance of food that we have. I think you said something like having this, fully built uterine lining requires 7% more energy compared to not having one. And then, shedding it actually saves a significant amount of energy.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's correct. It doesn't matter for us today. Of course, we have enough food, but evolution happened before that was the case.
Right. Yeah, I just thought it was a very, very interesting take on the menstrual cycle, because I have been asked this many times, like, why do we need to have a period? Why do we need to shed our lining? So now I have a good answer.
But the lining also, it has an interesting effect. The uterine lining is selecting the best embryo to implant. You're not just allowed to implant any embryo, because it's such a huge investment for the body to be pregnant. Right. So you don't want to invest this 9 months of your life for something that is not viable. And this is where the lining plays such a crucial role in really selecting the best ones that are worth investing your energy in.
I know. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I know that was something as well, like that we've always been told that sperm are the dictators of how all of this is going to go down, fertilization and all of that, but that's really not the case.
No, that's really not the case. So the first of all, the uterus is making a first selection of the sperm. When it enters the uterus, it capacitates some of the sperm, the ones that it also considers being strong enough. Then this capacitation it's like doping kind of. It just suddenly becomes very strong, and that makes it so strong that it can start, swimming up in the fallopian tubes where it's going to meet the egg. And then the whole inner environment of the fallopian tubes, it has like this small hairs inside, and they are all helping the sperm to reach its destination. So it's really being guided all the way to the egg that is there, and then there's this fusion happening between the sperm and the egg. So it used to be, you always talked about them as brave little swimmers. Fine, you can use that, but you can still look at the reproductive organs handing it out like power bars, showing it the right way to go. And really, helping that reach its destination in any possible way to make the journey easier.
Yep, I could see that. They're just having a little snack along the way. Yeah, I totally get that. And I feel like it's all the way because that happens in the cervix, with that cervical fluid. And then now you're talking about the uterus and then the fallopian tube. So yeah, there's lots of help to the little sperms all the way to the egg. So that's good. We're women are very accommodating.
Well, we only give it to the sperm that we consider worthy.
Right. Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
See, a lesson for adult life as well, ladies. Only the ones we consider worthy. And so what about something else that I think is also really important to talk about that comes up a lot in my work too is the immune system component. So we tend to be better at handling infections or, something acute than men. But we tend to have more autoimmune disorders or diseases than men do. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Yes, we can, but it has a little bit, seems to have a little bit less to do with the actual hormones, but more to do with our chromosomes. That we have 2 X chromosomes and the men only have 1, and some really important components seem to be on the X chromosomes. And of course, if you have 2, then you can select the best one, right? So we have a stronger immune system than men, but many of the illnesses or viruses we get, what we feel is not always the virus itself or the effect of the virus, but what we're feeling is the reaction of the immune system. So this is why, while we still have a strong immune system, we actually can be sick, a little bit sick more often because our immune system gets triggered more often. And that's also, the case with autoimmune disease. That's when your immune system is triggered too strongly. And kind of starts attacking some of your own functions.
So, sorry, I wasn't sure if you were going to add something else onto that.
Oh no, sorry.
That's okay. Was there anything else? I wasn't sure if that was it.
No, I think that's it. If you want to know something more, I mean, I can answer a specific question.
Yeah, no, okay. Well, I'll add something to that. So what about in sort of the second half of the cycle? I constantly hear about feelings of quote unquote the period flu, or my immune system seems to be triggered in that second half of the cycle, particularly that week before someone's period. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I haven't. I mean, I was kind of looking for some information about that for the book, but I didn't really manage to find some reliable information there.
Yeah.
So I didn't write about it because I didn't find, the backing. That, I mean, I really want to underline that does not mean that it isn't true. It's probably just one of those things that we need to do more research on to get some.
Comes back to that whole bias in medicine.
Yeah.
And research. Yeah, it's really fascinating to me because I feel like it's, it seems that this is obviously a more inflammatory time, particularly right before your period when those nice protective sex hormones drop so significantly. And that's where I see women telling me that they have these flu-like symptoms, or, they're acne or their eczema or their psoriasis kicks in or their asthma kicks up. I've seen a few bits of research on that.
But maybe it's then rather the opposite thing, because progesterone is inhibiting inflammation.
Right.
So maybe that,
like the drop in progesterone seems to be a trigger.
Yeah, so it could be rather the drop, I would say, in that case.
Yeah.
Because that's, that's also why you have so much progesterone during the whole pregnancy, because you have the contractions that you get to when you're going to give birth. They are actually an inflammation. It's these prostaglandins that are also active when you menstruate. Their role is to contract the uterus, and of course, if you're pregnant, it's really important that you don't have these contractions, and that's why progesterone goes higher and higher and higher to keep the inflammation under control. And you can also see, therefore, that progesterone starts going down during the last 4 to 5 weeks of pregnancy, so that you can, really, leave the option to the uterus to start with the contractions.
Right, which makes a lot of sense. It seems to be very similar to what happens every single month, every single cycle.
It does, yeah.
Yeah,
it does.
Yeah, that fluctuation. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I've gotten the sense too from those who have lower progesterone that those symptoms show up in more that week before their period, rather than when progesterone's dropping like 1 to 2 days before their period. So that makes a lot of sense to me, that might be what's going on. And of course, if you have low progesterone, typically that's linked to underlying causes, and there's a lot of inflammation involved in many cases. So I suppose all of that comes together and could explain why people are experiencing those symptoms, potentially.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's so fascinating when you really understand those underlying mechanisms, because you can start making a lot of conclusions as well. But of course, you should always, if you do it the scientific way, you should build your hypothesis, and then you should test it on a larger set and not just on yourself. But
I would love a study on the period flu. I would love it.
Yeah.
A girl can hope.
Yep.
Anyways, thank you so much. This was so awesome and very enlightening. And I loved this conversation, particularly about all the nuances of the menstrual cycle and just how FemTech has really changed the landscape of women's health. And I'm sure will continue to do so in really profound ways. Can you just talk about where everyone can find your very interesting and fun to read book?
Yeah, of course. It's first of all, it's called Go Figure: The Astonishing Science of the Female Body, and you can find it anywhere where you buy your books online. It's on Amazon. It's on, well, now I only know all the Swiss websites, but basically,
that's okay.
So I maybe should not talk about them, but anywhere where you buy books online, you should be able to find my book as well.
Okay, amazing. And I, again, want to thank you so much for all your pioneering work in this field, because I feel like you were at the beginning or at the forefront of the development of so much of this technology that has, I think personally, certainly changed my life and that of many of my clients and my audience. So thank you.
Thank you.
That's a wrap. Be sure to click that subscribe button to join me for more Girl Talk Gone Menstrual in upcoming episodes. But in the meantime, check out my latest Period Party episode. And if you're looking for a deeper dive into your hormones, go ahead and take my period quiz at nicolejardim.com/quiz.